Bugün üçüncü oturum.
Assalamualaikum. Good morning, everyone. In this morning, on the third day of the event, we are going to start with our panels. First, I have an announcement. Under normal conditions, we had 3 speakers in this session, but unfortunately, 2 of our speakers couldn't attend because they got sick. One of the speakers was here, and in this morning he was here, but now he had to went to hospital. And my other speaker, Hemarov, could come in, but unfortunately he couldn't. He was also ill. So I only have Mr. Nazif, Shahrani, and Mr. Kamuran, Gökdağ. Mr. Kamuran Gökdağ was in another panel, but he is now switched to this one. And with 2 distinguished panelists, I'm going to conduct this panel. Normally we were going to do this in English, but since Mr. Nazif Shahrani also speaks Turkish, we are going to do it in Turkish. So in this session we will be talking about lots of important subjects, practical and otherwise, when it comes to the world of Islam. And our title is Political Ideas and Practices in the Muslim World. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Nazif Shahrani. He will be talking about the future of Muslim societies in the age of empires by invitation.
Making it here, much appreciated. As you all know, the topics have been given to us. It was not our choice, but alhamdulillah, the topic that was given to me is the one that I would have probably chosen as well. So in that respect, it's a good choice for them and for me. What I would like to discuss about the uncertainties of Muslim political situation in the world today requires really a little bit of a historical background into how the world order has transformed over the centuries. And the current form is a continuation of the structures that were imposed in the world as a whole, in Muslim world in particular, several centuries ago. The world order for the longest time in the history of humanity, at least from the rise of centralized states, were empires of faith, that political structures were based on religious faith and continued for many, many centuries. That particular imperial structure had certain features that made it durable. The Roman Empire is said to have lasted for 700 years. The most recent empire, the Ottoman Empire, lasted 500 plus years. So there was something about those political structures, the world order, that had durability, and I think the most important feature was probably, although these empires wanted to be centralized, but they couldn't achieve it. So as a result, they allowed decentralization of power structure, and that made it durable. But something happened in the 18th century in Europe. That, of course, was followed by industrial revolution and production of commercial goods. And what happened in England in 1668, which they themselves refer to as the Glorious Revolution, was the fact that the British people essentially denied the right of international commerce to the royal family and claimed the possibility of international trade to the people. to the citizens. And that resulted in the creation of something I'm sure all of you are familiar, and that is East India Company and many other companies, which started a new form of imperial structure. That was empire of commerce. That these private companies managed with a new technology of seagoing trade, seagoing boats, or what do you call, I suppose boats or the larger sort of commercial entities that managed to go across the oceans. And that created, in India at least, for Britain, a very lucrative colonial environment from which they extracted huge amounts of wealth and brought it to UK, and also Europeans, other Europeans followed as well. And that particular enterprise was so successful that they essentially asked their government to come and protect their interests wherever they went. So what happened was that the empire by commerce, or empires of commerce, turned into military empires of colonial nature. The governments went with military, took those countries where their traders were in, and protected them. And that, of course, continued for several more centuries, from 17th, 18th century all the way to 20th century. What happened, of course, in the process was that people realized what these military empires with commercial interests were doing, that they were extracting a lot of wealth from these countries and transferring them to Europe. And they rebelled. So what we have all witnessed by the 20th century was wars of liberation, that people clearly see what European colonialists were doing to them. And they resisted it. And the Europeans, in turn, came up with a new way of essentially addressing their problems in colonial world, and that was formation of new so-called modern nation states. Something that Europeans themselves had done in the 17th century. In 1648, when they had Westphalia's conference, and after 30 years of war in Europe itself, they formed their own modern nation states, but those were peculiarly different kinds of entities than the ones they created in so-called post-colonial world. Those European states were supposedly homogeneous in terms of their language, religious sectarian formation, cultural makeup, and so forth, so that they created Germany for Germans, or France for the French, and Italy for the Italians, and so on. And we know how much suffering some of those countries went through to have homogeneous countries like France. France was not French, but it was made into French, with a lot of war and violence and other things that happened to them. But what they did in post-colonial world in the beginning of the 20th century to middle of the 20th century was creation of nation states that were not homogeneous. They made sure they are not homogeneous. They drew borders through groups, linguistic groups, sectarian groups, and whatnot. So they created a whole lot of them. And in the process, of course, they destroyed the last empire of faith in the Muslim world, that was the Ottoman Empire, and divided up into multiple Arab nations. And of course, in East Europe, you all know how many nations were created there and so on. But Something else happened after World War II. Well, I should mention, actually, the modern nation states in Europe that they had fought for and built eventually turned this idea of nationalism into fascism. So that you had two wars in Europe based on fascist ideologies. For World War I and World War II were in fact the result of nationalist ideology, which in my opinion, nationalism is one of the worst poisons, ideological poisons, that Europeans introduced and realized in Europe what they had done. But they were very happy introducing it in the post-colonial world, in Asia, Africa, Latin America, everywhere. Because by World War II, they transformed the old military empires into a new form of empire. It's called empire by invitation, or empire of trust. Americans call it their own empire, empire of trust. And they say they have modeled it after the Roman Empire. The characteristics of Roman Empire in the American Empire is that they don't directly invade another country. The first thing they do is create dependency. Make other states dependent on them, politically, economically, culturally, ideologically, in every way possible. And they also create situations in those dependencies of conflict mostly, that those countries invite them to please come and invade our country. The one country that I'm from, I can give you example, and that's Afghanistan. I'm originally from Afghanistan, and I've suffered the situation over the last 45, 50 years of how they created the original so-called Afghanistan in 1880 is a buffer state between Britain and Tsarist Russia in 1880 and after that. And then, of course, 3 generations later, those of you who are familiar with Afghanistan's history, in 1919, Amanullah declared independence. But in 1880, they had given money, they had given weapons, and they have appointed the king, Abdurrahman, Amanullah's grandfather in Afghanistan. And of course, in 1919, when Amanullah declared independence, the British stopped the subsidies. No more arms, no more money. So what happened? He couldn't last even 10 years. He had to increase the taxation. People rebelled, and he had introduced some reforms. With all of that, the regime was essentially destroyed, and Amanullah fled to Italy, and a new government, again, was introduced by Britain, with weapons, with money, and they brought and set up a new government. So this is the dependency that I'm talking about. That dependency is such that in some small countries, and Turkey may be an exception, because it was an empire, and it got essentially split into pieces. But at least part of it managed to hold on and did not become so dependent. Although dependencies vary, but there was dependencies for a period of time, but not as bad as in other places. And so what happened was and then after World War II, the Cold War came. So the world became bipolar, and each of the poles essentially created their own dependencies, based this time in a really nonsensical ideological split of the left and the right, the capitalists and the communists, or socialists and so forth. Each of them tried to create dependence of their own in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and all the rest. But what's most important is America emerged as the most powerful new form of imperial system, empire by invitation, in competition with former Soviet Union, and shortly, unipolar, and then now it's becoming multipolar. But what's important for us to realize is that European countries are, in fact, have transformed themselves into a new form of empire. It's an imperial structure, whether we like it or not. It's just a lot of countries are dependent and are also suffering. In Afghanistan, that ideological split in the 1960s, when I was at the university in Afghanistan, turned the Islamists, the Marxists, the nationalists, and so forth into each other's throat. And they were fighting on the streets, on campus, everywhere. And eventually, the communists won in Afghanistan, the battle. And they invited the Soviet Union to come and take the country because they couldn't survive. The national movement rose, and the jihad movement in Afghanistan in the 1980s also turned into a capitalist, essentially, tool to fight against the Soviet Union. And eventually, when the Mujahideen won the war, at least, the military side of it, they did not allow them to win the political side. So 1990s was turned into a war of factions within Afghanistan, fighting each other. And eventually the rise of Taliban, and of course 2001 was another moment in which America and NATO invited itself to invade Afghanistan. And they ruled for 20 years, and at the end of the 20 years, they left billions of dollars worth of weapons, and America has been funding the Taliban at the rate of $40 million a week to keep them in power. Why? Again, it's a question of dependency. Those of you who remember Trump, towards the end of his last term, he said, Taliban are a war machine. Whoever pays them, they will fight for them. So America is keeping Taliban as a war machine to be used against its own enemies in the region. That's China, Russia, Iran. Whenever they wish, they can do whatever they want in Afghanistan, and neighboring countries will suffer from that. So this empire by invitation is, I think, the most vicious form of contemporary imperial system with colonial intentions that we often don't really realize, because this form of empire does two things simultaneously. One is fight a war, a hot war. America spent $2 trillion in Afghanistan fighting a war, including testing its mother of bombs, all bombs, non-nuclear bomb, in Afghanistan. And of course, all kinds of other weapons. But at the same time, it spent $180 billion in reconstruction. Those of you who know Afghanistan in the 1990s, it was in rubble. Kabul was destroyed. There was nothing standing on there. But in the last 20 years, Kabul has been rebuilt. It's a modern city with all kinds of amenities that they handed over to Taliban. It has universities, colleges, hospitals, all kinds of healthcare system and so forth. And of course, Taliban destroyed some of those during their 20 years of so-called war against America. But the strange thing is, while America was fighting Taliban, it also funded the Taliban. There is a very, very important book for those of you who want to look at it. It's by somebody who actually lives in the town I teach, Bloomington, Indiana. His name is Douglas Wissing, and he has a book called Funding the Enemy. Funding the Enemy, how America funded the Taliban while fighting it. It's a fascinating book because it's about 300 pages. About 150 pages of that is text. The rest is actually sources, where he actually documents how America funded the Taliban while it was fighting it. So this is the nature of this empire by invitation. It's so subtle. They build and they destroy at the same time. We don't know whether they are our enemies or our friends. When you don't know your enemy, you cannot find them. You cannot fight them. So this is something that we have to realize. Empire by invitation is a whole new notion of world order that is difficult to detect. There's not much written about it. There's one book by Thomas Madden that I refer to called Empire of Trust, which describes America. And there are several articles by Europeans that they refer to America as empire by invitation because in both world wars, they invited America to come and invade Europe. So we need to really take a look around the world order that we know today and try to realize that and see how it operates and why it creates instability in the world. Our uncertain horizons in the Muslim world is something directly related to this reality. So if we come to understand it, I think we will have a chance to plan how to react, how to defend, how to do something about it. If we continue not to understand that this is also an imperial system, one that is very destructive, very vicious, we will continue to sort of let it go. So I'm essentially trying to remind us that let's look at the nature of the current world order, whether it is, it's obviously European. It's obviously in the north. If the East, Chinese are coming in, it'll be part of the same structure. They will be even more vicious imperial structure by invitation. Because look what they're doing in East Africa with all the facilities, what do you call them, the shipping facilities. And what they're doing in Pakistan, what they're also one belt, one road issue. All of these are really structured after the American empire by invitation or empire by trust. So we need to, as Muslim countries, I think we are the victim, the worst, perhaps, victim of this imperial structure. And we need to understand and call it what it is. That they're not our friends. They pretend to be friends, but they are also enemies at the same time because they throw some things to us and confuse us. In that sense, I fear the horizons of uncertainty in the Muslim world may continue for a while, unless we realize it, unless we also plan it, unless we do something to remedy it, if we can. I'm not sure whether we can, because they are also, in the Muslim world, have been supporting dictatorships. The last one we just saw falling apart in Syria. But when these dictatorships fall apart, they fall apart by the support of the worst terroristic Islamic movements to undermine Islam even further. And we don't know what follows the fall of dictatorships, except by example, because in every place where dictators have fallen, something worse has happened, not something better. So that also is not, unfortunately, telling us a very good news about the future of the Islamic polities, Islamic world, Islamic nations. And my own personal fear is that we're going to be in this mess of uncertainty for a long time, unless we come to realization and do something. Thank you very much.
Teşekkür ediyoruz Nazif Shahrani'ye.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nazif Shahrani, he attended from Indiana University. I think he touched upon many important topics. I will not repeat what he said, but particularly dependency is always being created again and again in the Islamic world, and this is dynamic. In the Islamic world, we are confronting this threat all the time, even though the font changes, because he also marked some of the transformations throughout history: colonialism, First World War, Second World War, Cold War, industrialism again. So it's like a new world order is being established, but this is also similar dependency relationship, not only for the Islamic world, but also the other countries. So because of the instabilities of politics, it results in a dilemma. You try to be stable, but this is the root of instability, and instability, as you face instability as Muslim countries, in order to ensure stability once again, you invite European countries. So this is a dilemma, this is a circle. So in Q&A part, if there are any questions, we can ask questions. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Nazif Shahrani. Now, without further ado, we will continue with our second speaker, Mr. Kamuran Gökdağ. He's coming from Mardin Artuklu University. He will be talking about rethinking of the justice circle, information, power, economic, and society. Thank you for your introduction. We know each other. With Nazif Shahrani, we were together with him in Indiana University in the United States. Normally, I would be in the other hall, as the speakers didn't arrive today, couldn't come to the session. I passed to the session, and Nazif Shahrani is living in the United States, but he is actually supporting all the students going from Turkey to United States. So in your presence, I would like to extend my gratitude to him once again. Mr. Nazif Shahrani, our professor, already touched upon many important topics: new order and reflections of the transformations on Muslims and how heavy the prices. Now, I will be talking about patterns and the covers. This world order is supposed to bring us human rights, liberalism. It is marketed to us with these covers, with these patterns. So if you look under the cover, you see the landscape, as Nazif Shahrani mentioned. So, justice is one of them. Justice is a very general concept, very broad concept, I would say. So we need to enunciate it. So it is not possible for us to analyze the justice in all aspects. I will be touching upon the concept of justice through economy and society and politics due to the time limitation. First of all, I presume some theses. I will mention some of my theses. I have 5 different theses, and after that we will look at the definition of justice in the classical term, and then we will look at the logic of justice and we will look at the risks, and we need to make an addition, and I will suggest this, and I hope that I will be able to come up with all of them. What I presume, let me read it. First of all the scholars talking about state and justice, they think that this is a covered convention and agreement before Hobbes and after Hobbes. With these conventional philosophers, this is not related to them. In any kind of reflection or consideration of justice, we see that it is intertwined with state and political regime. It is associated with a state regime or a government regime, but normally it is not possible to have an independent concept of justice. It is really important that the justice is the basis of the state, but state is also the justice, also the basis of the justice, vice versa. Again, the logic of power is not able to acknowledge the concept of justice. And last but not least, as 5 aspect, justice is not limited to. There are many equivalences. Justice is not God. Justice is not queen. Justice is not king. Justice is not law. Justice is not order. Justice is none of them. Justice is broader than these. I will not be able to explain or dive into any of these concepts, but these are the norms that I accept. Justice means that everything should be in order. Can you hear me clearly with the microphone? So the justice means that everything should be as it should be. Everything should be in the place that it should be. So this is the definition of justice in general concept and a broader concept. But until today, in each and every culture, we see that this definition has been acknowledged. But after this definition, we see when we ask more questions that the definition is dispersed or collapsed. So what is the place of something? If everything has a place, then how can we define this place? So this is the first question. And another question, prioritizing this question, is that if you would like to place something to somewhere, so you need to define that. So when you ask these two questions, then the definition of justice, the alliance on the definition of justice is dispersed. And again, throughout the history, there are many answers to these questions. I think one of the most important answers is the understanding of the Department of Justice. According to the cosmology and according to the morality and with the accumulation of this knowledge and this wisdom, it is built on the accumulation of this information. And cosmology and morality contributes to the definition of Department of Justice. And Ardeshir, Aristoteles, Armoshivan contributes to this definition. Sometimes they also mention Ibn Haldun, and they think that there is this kind of department for justice of Ibn Haldun. And I think Ibn Haldun is not related with the circle of justice. Sometimes just it is mentioned. That is all, not more than this. And we see that they sometimes organize the tables and they write Ibn Haldun under that. So, for the Department of Justice, there are some concepts and some norms, and it is differentiated, but in the final phase, it is composed by 8 different circles. Justice is the world order of the world. If you follow that, you will understand that. Justice is the order of the world, and the state is preserving the order of the world. And the state is preserved by the rules, by the law. And again, rules are preserved by the government, by the power. And the government is preserved and protected by the military, and military is protected by economy, and economy is formed by the people, and people only continues to prevail with justice. So the circle is followed in this way. And we form the circle starting from the justice and ending again with justice, with the concept of justice. So we see 2 different logical aspects, and these logical aspects, one of them is about motion, and we receive this understanding from cosmology. Again, for the principle, we have the science of morality. For motion, for classical cosmology in the universe, we have the universe before the moon and after the moon. And for all these things, the motion, the moment is circular. So this circular movement starts from one point and ends in the same point. So it starts again. Circular motion starts again and again from the same point. So if this circulation is perfect, then it means that it does not have any center. So this is the idea of circularity. This is the idea of circle. So that is why decentralism is very important for the theory of justice and classical cosmology, and this attribution over the moon and the circulation and the movement of all the particles in the moon and over the moon. And again, this is also correlated with morality. And you know, we have the ethics. Ethics is very important. And again, the virtue is very important. There are some kind of analysis and operations about virtue, about morality. And according to the classical understanding, the humanity have some kind of domes. For example, mind is one of the domes of the person. So in different 2 ends, in 2 ends we have the results. For example, you can be either generous, or you will be some kind of you will either waste the money, or save the money. So these are 2 characteristics. So it is like 2 domes, 2 opposite domes, 2 ends. So you need to take all of these domes to the center. There will be no exceptions. So when we take all of these domes to the place, then these powers and these forces will be called as justice. So for the classical morality, if you construct this, the concept of justice is determined, and there are other concepts which are also included in the broader term of justice. This is the classical view. But in the modern political philosophy, we have the founder, as we acknowledge him. Thomas Hobbes is acknowledged, as you know. And Thomas Hobbes advocates modern moral theory. And he is also acknowledged as the founder of modern moral theory. Even though there are some derivations, Thomas Hobbes, in a sense, also approves the classical term of justice. Because, you know, the emergence of state is also related with justice. So what should we do? There should be total obedience to the power, to the state, and this will also cover the justice. Everything is justice. Whatever the state does, whatever the power does, all the actions are called justice, and we should obey to that. And Thomas Hobbes says that in this theory, there is not any differentiation for Thomas Hobbes. As Nazif Shahrani, our professor, said, these are modern Western philosophy. This is the decision also like the rough power relation. I beat you, I defeated you, and I have all the power to think about you. And this is called justice. So if you call it justice, then if you call this right, then this is right. So Thomas Hobbes also advocates for that. There are three reasons about the circle of justice. And there are different flows, and these flows are blocked now. So we don't see the movement of circle anymore. First of all, we have the socio-political conditions, states, political regimes, and whatever we have today. That, apart from differentiation, we don't have any similarities right now. And secondly, because of the difference of the positions, and it is taken from the Greek understanding, and there is the principle of distinction, and it is based on archae, nature, birth, richness, information, and these are now functional, and we understand these privileges, these concessions right now. And in Islamic understanding, the circle of justice, as we couldn't purify this Islamic thought from those parameters, that is why justice before justice, I would call that. It is the idea of order. It is the problem of power, so justice before justice. So it is very similar, very simultaneous formation with state and with order. So justice is related with order, with power. Sultan, you cannot reason the decree or the decisions of Sultan. You cannot reason or object it. That is why I think that the circle of justice is blocked now. And this non-circular movement is not happening right now. It is plugged, it is congested. For the circle of justice, again, each sentence has a carrier definition. And what we have here, when we mention justice, we need to be fair. And we need to look at the order, state, law, power, military, economy, people, and obedience. These are the absolute terms which should be defined together with justice. And God willing, we will be able to define all of these terms, and we are actually working on a project, and we will write a book about these definitions related to justice. The correlation of these terms, of these definitions, because these are all sub-definitions. So if you take this above, then all of these can all be analyzed, but we have time limitation here in this hall and this panel right now. That is why let's focus on 3 different blocks, definition blocks. One of them is power, the other one is economy, and the third one is relation, the correlation between justice, between power and economy. Justice, in the essence, in the core, is a problem of system between the state, the power, and economy. So justice is based on a theory regulating the power and economy, the relation between the power and economy. So what should be circulated, what should be mobilized or moved in this circle of justice. So this should be in circulation. These terms, these definitions should be circulated. One of them is power. Power should be circular. The second one is economy. Economy should be circular as well. So if you congest, if you block the movement of economy, or if you block the movement or the circulation of power, then the circle of justice will be shattered, and we will see the violence after this. So, for the circle of justice, there are some theory academicians, and they don't talk about the obedience and the role of obedience between the power and economy. The logical convention, there is a logical agreement for obedience. Obedience to the economy and the power. The justice is the order of the world. Obedience of the people is only ensured with justice. That is why order is definitely related to justice. So, justice is ensuring all of these circles. That is why, in order to actualize obedience, what are the conditions? What are the prerequisites? In the Islamic understanding, in the Islamic philosophy, there are some answers, but I think that we need to answer, we need to find response to this question. I think that there should be a theory of convention, and the obedience is the result of a logical convention between the power and economy. So we need to look at the conditions of the agreement. So if we don't see the conditions of the agreement, then the theory of justice will only be related to order. And Mr. Nazif already mentioned that. And there is a new power, and this is based on this justice, this balance is based on power. It is not fair. And now this order is now defined as justice. This power is defined as justice. This power is defined as freedom. That is why if we cannot find conditions, then this circle of justice will be the theory to legitimize injustice. And what is this convention? What is this agreement?
Bir iktidarın nasıl var olduğu
So this convention contract is about how a power ensures its continuity. But before that, it's about the question how that power existed in the first place. So what is our share as individuals or public in terms of making sure that power exists and how we transfer that power? So these questions are two different questions, and these questions also closely relate to the idea of justice. So how power is established is a long subject. I'm not going to go into detail, but as a result of a competition or a conflict, in a group of people we see two different positions coming out. One is the power, the other is about the economy. On the power side, you have politicians, maybe previously sultan, etc., but now the power is much wider. There are different proxies of it, of power. And there's also an economic position. And that's where the public is located. So the public and also the rulers divided from each other and being in different position is based on a contract between them. Basically, this is a contract between those who rule and those who are ruled. So they basically, both sides give the other their position and they accept that as a contract. So this is a positional change. It's not an ontological change. And Hobbes and his theories, and of course Hobbes and the entire basis of that is that's where they are a bit misleading, because they see it as an ontological change. So they focus on the idea that now that I'm here, I will be here forever. But what I'm saying is a bit different, in that it is a positional change. So basically the rulers leave a share of themselves in the other side, and those who are ruled leave some share in those who rule. So the nature of justice and economy and power is very similar to each other. So these three things are the things that the ownership can't be transferred. This goes for justice, economy, and power. So looking at what is being represented and who is representing it, and okay, I'm wrapping up. Okay, I am already at the end. I'm wrapping up. So
Mizaç teorisi şu,
There's what
doğal
they
bir oluşumun
call
doğal dengesi gibi, yani bir oluşuma katılan unsurlar arasında mutlak bir denklik söz konusu olduğunda
a theory
oluşum mizacını edinmez. Mizacını
about the
tamamlamaz.
Mizaj theory,
Tamama erdiniz. Rekabet, çatışma, kaos, kaotik durum
focusing
devam.
on
Dolayısıyla da
this
bu
temperament
iktidar alanına
theory.
bu taleplerle katılan
So
her bir unsur
every
aslında
aspect
aynı özdeş taleplerle katılıyor. Dolayısıyla
that
da
joins
bunlar
this
arasında
power
dengeli
struggle
kuracak bir
has demands, and
unsurun baskın gelmesi gerekiyor.
one
Bu baskın
party
gelen
out of them
unsur,
has to
iktidar olarak
dominate
adalet ve
so that
adalet dediğim şey,
they can rule.
adaletin temeli olabilecek mülk olarak inşa olunuyor ve bundan sonraki süreç
And the process, okay, I only ask for 2 minutes. So the process after that
iktidarın kendi şahsında
is all about
teşebbüs ettiği bu kişinin
the power
kararı ne olacak?
and the
Yani
person who represents
gerek
power and
olacak
what does
kişilerin ekonomik,
what's his decision,
ekolojik, politik varoluşlarını muhafaza edecek,
and how does he
alacak, güvenceye alacak,
ensure
nasıl kararlar alacak? Bir,
the existence,
kaba güç
what kind of
teorisine
decisions
başvuralım.
he take. For example,
Kaba güç
first he
teorisi,
can
yani diyebilir ki ben sizi
do
dolayısıyla da
brute
size
force,
yönetirim.
brute power. So he can
Evet,
say, I
yani
beat
sizi
you,
yönetme hakkına sahibim.
that means I dominate you, and I can do whatever I want, and that's justice. That's fair. So he can say, what I do can't be defined as unjust. And since Hobbes, modern Western philosophy, this is the definition of their justice. That's so it's their definition is based on brute force. And the power's representative can also say, in addition to this brute force, he can also try to address the question of how can I exist, and also make sure that the others exist. So this is the second is on top of the brute force, because without brute force you have to have the force, otherwise you will never exist. So it's something you have to have. But in addition to force, someone can say, I don't only lead by force, but also apply with ethical or mind or logical approaches. So he can also say, on top of brute force and logical rules, I also use ethical principles as well, and political principles. And in that section there are a lot of experiences in history that he can look for. He can basically benefit from others' wisdom, others from the past. We have a lot of examples who led fairly, and this way that the ruler can also apply to those. Or, in addition to these things, he can also say, the representative of power, he can also say, I follow brute force, logical principles, and also ethical principles. On top of these things, I also take religious principles as reference. So that's the next stage. These, of course, depend, all of these things depend on the decision of that representative of power. Just the last few sentences. As I've said, the religious principles, when he applies religious principles as well, and this is where we also fall into a mistake, where sometimes people think religion and logic is opposite to each other, but it's not. They go hand in hand. So what that brings us to is that a kind of ruling system with religious principles is the richest and the most efficient way of ruling. So Imam Shafi says,
Allah'a
Justice
benzeterek eylemde bulunmasıdır diye tanımlar.
is all about
Değil, bir eylem olarak tanımlar.
justice is an action, he says, and the more you can do that action as people, the more just you are. So that's what I want to end on. So we thank Mr. Kamuran Gökdağ. We don't have too much time left, but to briefly summarize, he mentioned how the circle of justice is not working anymore, it's not turning, and he had some clear proposals and examples. And he mentioned brute force on top of logical, ethical, and religious principles on top of those. He also touched upon the Western idea and approach to justice and the definitions regarding that. He made some important remarks. Hopefully we'll get a chance to listen it in more detail in the future events. So we have very limited time, but maybe we can take a few questions. If you can ask your questions very quickly, I'd appreciate that. We'll collect the questions and then at once, at the end, we will answer the questions. This is Hamit Erdem from Didim Aydın region. Brute force, my scholar here mentioned brute force, and that reminded me the Prophet Muhammad's efforts when he was trying to establish justice. We also know that he used his force, the force of his tribe. So when dictating justice, he used the force of his tribe. So that's also a form of brute force, right? This is Ubeydullah Aleyhizade. Selamun Aleyküm. I'd like to ask this question to Mr. Nazif. So, you explained it really well about imperialism, and in 1979 there was an Iran Islamic Revolution. This is seen as anti-imperialist, but then of course things happened in Syria and Afghanistan. In Syria, for example, in 1980s, Hama at the time, basically they destroyed a town where Muslims were there, so it was a huge massacre. And now we see what Assad, the son, is doing. So Assad family is representing Baas political party, built by Michel Efla. I'm not sure, but he wasn't a Muslim, he was a Christian. Or maybe he was Jewish. His party was established by him. So we thought that Iran Islamic Revolution was anti-imperialist, but also Muslim. They also supported the Baas party. So what can you say on these things about the Iran Islamic Revolution or the Baas party in Syria? Hello. In your last sentence, towards the end of your speech, you also mentioned how logics and religious principles are not opposite to each other, but they go hand in hand. So, does that mean we put religion above logic, or how do we understand it? Or there's a logic to religion? How do you understand that? Okay, that's another question. One last question.
I'm Güder from Qatar-based think tank. I would like to ask my question to Dr. Nazif. You mentioned how the United States is an imperial power. I mean, if I can rephrase what you said, has sort of not been a very benevolent imperial power. Now, my question to you is that something which is just the nature of power, and the fact that United States had an unprecedented unilateral sort of power in the hands of the United States, and this is very unprecedented. Is that the reason why United States behaved this way? And perhaps any other country which should have been in this place of United States with that kind of unprecedented power, perhaps would have behaved exactly the same way. So are we really targeting United States just because of the fact that it was in that place and maybe any other country would have behaved exactly the same way, or there is something very unique about the United States in this matter? Thank you.
Evet, biz teşekkür ediyoruz. Now, şey yapalım, soruları cevaplandıralım. The floor is yours. 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for excellent questions. When Kamuran was speaking, it reminded me of actually Qutad Gubilik and Balsaguni. We sort of go back to what Hobbes said and Europeans said and so forth, but our own have said the same thing in better 1,000 years ago. We need to really come back to our own circle of justice. In Qutb Balsaguni says actually in order for a state to be stable, four conditions have to be available. One is a large army, both on horseback in his time, of course, and also on foot. To have a large army, you have to have wealth. Okay? In order to have wealth, you have to have justice. So you can see the logic, okay? And he says, if you have justice, then you will have a stable government. If you don't have any of these four things, the state will collapse. It's just simple. Justice is necessary for production of wealth. Wealth is necessary for having essentially the means to resist chaos and also other kinds of things. And you need to have the means in order to be able to maintain these things. So it's that simple. And I think the question that was raised about Iran is a very fair question. And I indicated something, that we have been placed in reactive mode, the entire world, because by what the West and the imperial systems have done, we are always in a knee-jerk sort of thing. We have to do something. And the easiest thing for Muslim world has been to rely on Islam. Mobilize people in the name of Islam so that you can respond and react to Western, horrors. And we haven't really thought through. Imam Khomeini has a book, those of you who have read it, about the new system of governance based on what the mullahs have done in Iran. But it's not appropriate for the kind of impositions that the West has brought about in the Muslim world. We really are not prepared in terms of having a blueprint of our own for how to manage our own affairs, in how to deal with in the context in which we live, which is, again, imperial, transforming itself constantly. We can't catch up. Every time we react, there is something new that they bring about. So what did they do with Iran? Impose all kinds of restrictions on Iranian behavior and undermined it. So the mullahs, even if they had the good intention, they haven't succeeded. So it is that unfortunate simple. The nature of power, we can assume that power is evil, and the more power is more evil. But there is something called ethical principles. You can manage power better if you also had ethical principles of good and bad. I have lived in the United States more than half a century. United States has a double standard. One is domestic, where they need to act ethically. if any powerful person in America does not act ethically in America, he'll be taken to court. Even Trump has been convicted of various crimes. But internationally, there is no ethical principle doing anything to American power. In the name of national interest, the American governments can do anything they wish, and Americans, citizens, don't pay any attention. They don't give a damn what America does internationally. That's the problem of the United States. I have many times, when I've asked, especially about war in Afghanistan and other things that I've spoken, especially the seniors, the retirees who are very much concerned, they said, you contact your senators and say, ask the United States government to act ethically internationally. And they don't. So that's part of the how power is managed in the United States, unfortunately. It's unethical in its behavior internationally and very ethical within the domestic politics. And that sort of double standard, is terrible.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz Nazif Bey'e. Vakit kaybetmeden Kamuran Hocam buyurun siz.
Eyvallah hocam, teşekkür ediyorum. Soru.
So thank you very much, and thank you very much for the questions. When it comes to the question about Prophet Muhammad using his tribe's brute force to rule, can that be considered as brute force? Yes, I think so. And of course, to briefly say something about it, and that brute force of his tribe played a role on his prophecy as well. When Hazreti Abu Bakr was chosen as the first caliphate, there was lots of discussion and arguments, and in the end they resolve it by referencing that Abu Bakr is from Quraysh region, which references to his power. So without that tribal power, maybe he wouldn't be chosen as the first caliphate. For example, the other tribes, the weaker ones, maybe instead of being from Quraysh, maybe if he was from one of the weaker tribes, most likely he wasn't going to be chosen as the first caliphate because there were other stronger tribes, regional tribes, including Ümeyyoğulları and Haşimoğulları. Those tribes wouldn't let him. So basically, again, even during that, even when Hazreti Abu Bakr was chosen as caliphate, it was because of his strong tribal force. And secondly, what I can say is that there is an intentional distance created between us and the political power. Nazif scholar mentioned power can be considered evil, and more power can be considered even more evil. And then he mentioned how you can use that power using ethical principles, for example, and that determines everything. So that might mean the power itself is not bad, but how you use it and in what principles you use it is what matters. So there is this distance being created between us and power. So we have been here talking about lots of issues for the last 2 days, and not just for the last 2 days, but we have been talking about these subjects for years now. But in the root of all these things lies that we lost that political or physical power. So once you regain that power, you will actually see that those things we see as crises are not crises. And so the power itself is not bad by itself, in my opinion. Looking at the Prophet or the first 4 caliphates, it's all about power. Ibn Haldun, for example, says if those people weren't from strong tribes, they couldn't lead. So Ibn Haldun actually sets relations between those concepts, between brute force and rule and principles. And he says if brute force is not being checked by ethical or religious principles, it's just like a human body, but naked human body. So you have the body as power, but you also have to dress it with clothing to make it more refined and use it better. So also additionally, I mean, politically, you have to have that body. That's power. So you have to dominate. You have to have that body. But once you have the body, once you have the power, you have to dress it. You can't be naked. You can dress it with logical principles, ethical principles, religious principles to make it more refined and use it better. But again, logical principles and religious principles, they are not opposite, or you don't have to choose one over the other. On the contrary, they go hand in hand. So when you put logical principles and you put religious principles on top, you will get a better result. And in that sense, brute force, logical principles, religious principles, they are like the layers of an onion that go on top of each other. So religious principles are at the top and they have a bigger reference. And that's what I can say about it. Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt because we are very late. I would like to thank Mr. Nazif Shahrani from Indiana University and also Mr. Kamuran. I'd like to thank my panelists, scholars. Also, thank you all for listening and being with us. Thank you. Dear guests, we have some gifts to our panelists and our moderator to remember this day.